The Forest That Never Ends by Bella R. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys a good hike. The kind where you can lose yourself in nature, get some fresh air, maybe snap a few pictures and just clear your mind. So when I found myself with a free weekend, I decided to go out and do what I do best, spend some time in the woods. I drove about an hour outside of town, hoping to find a trail I hadn't been on before. I had a map with me, though I wasn't really planning on using it too much. I figured I would just follow the path, enjoy the scenery, and let my mind wander. That was the plan, anyway. The hike started off like any other. The air was crisp, the sun was out, and the forest was thick with trees, mostly pines and oaks. The trail was well marked, and everything felt pretty normal. I was feeling good, and I even came across a couple of other hikers, all friendly, nothing out of the ordinary. It was a peaceful day. But as I kept going, I started to notice something weird. The farther I went, the more it felt like the trees were closing in around me. At first, I thought I was just being dramatic. It wasn't like the trees were actually crowding me, right? But something about the way the light filtered through the leaves, the way everything just was, felt off. It's hard to explain. The shadows seemed darker, and the air had this heavy, almost suffocating quality to it. I brushed it off, though. Maybe I was just tired. I had been hiking for a few hours by that point. Around the 4-hour mark, I came across a fork in the trail. There was a small sign that didn't really offer any direction, but I figured I would explore it and see where the other path led. The thing is, when I turned down that path, something changed. I can't really put my finger on it or put it into words. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to arch over the trail, or how the forest suddenly felt silent, like unnervingly silent. But I kept going, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. The weirdness really kicked in after another hour or so. I'd been hiking for a while, but when I checked my watch, I realized that the time had passed a lot faster than it should have. I mean, I didn't stop for breaks or anything, but I'd been on the trail for well over 5 hours, and the sun was still high in the sky. It didn't make any sense. There was no way I'd been walking for that long without it getting at least a little darker. I stopped and took a few deep breaths. Okay, maybe I had lost track of time. It happens sometimes when you're just wandering, right? But as I looked around, I realized something else was off. I hadn't seen any other hikers in a while. Not that it's unusual to be alone in the woods, but it felt wrong somehow, like I had entered some kind of weird limbo where the rest of the world just didn't exist. At that point, I figured I should probably turn back. I didn't know if I was going in circles or if I was just getting paranoid, but it seemed like a good idea to retrace my steps. I turned around and started back the way I'd come, hoping to find the original trail again. But no matter which direction I walked in, the forest kept stretching out in front of me like it never ended. There were no familiar landmarks, no sign of the fork I had passed earlier, and no clear path. It felt like I was walking in a straight line for ages. But the scenery just kept changing in ways that didn't make any sense. Every tree looked the same. Every rock, every bush, every trail marker. I could swear I'd passed the same spot 2 or 3 times. But when I looked at my watch, it didn't match up with how much time had passed. I'd been walking for 6, maybe 7 hours now, but the light didn't seem to be fading. It was like the sun was frozen in place at high noon or something. The whole thing was starting to feel too bizarre for comfort. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but there was no service. I wasn't even getting a GPS signal, just the little loading circle spinning endlessly on the screen. At this point, I was getting genuinely freaked out. I had no idea where I was anymore. After another hour of walking in circles, literally, I sat down on a large rock, trying to calm myself down. My head was starting to ache and my legs were sore, but the idea of just sitting there and doing nothing felt worse. So I stood up and started walking again, hoping that this time I'd find a way out. I'm not sure how long it was before I noticed something else strange. There were no birds, there were no insects buzzing, no rustling of leaves in the wind, just complete and utter silence. That's when I really started to panic. I don't know what came over me, but I had this overwhelming sense that something was wrong. Like something was watching me. I could feel it in my bones. I started walking faster, my breath coming in short gasps, but no matter how fast I walked, nothing changed. The trees were the same. The path was the same. The silence was still suffocating. And then, just as I was about to give up and collapse on the ground, I saw it. A small clearing. It was almost like a spotlight in the middle of the woods. It was the first break in the trees I'd seen in hours. I couldn't believe it. I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, praying I wasn't imagining it. When I finally reached the clearing, I collapsed onto the soft grass and just laid there for a moment, catching my breath. But as I lay there, staring up at the sky, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't in the same clearing I'd seen earlier. In fact, I didn't recognize this place at all. It wasn't even remotely familiar. And worse, when I checked my watch again, I saw that somehow another hour had passed since I first entered the clearing. That's when I knew something was not right. The sun still hadn't moved. It was still stuck, like I was in some kind of time loop, trapped in a forest that never ended. I don't know how much longer I spent wandering around, looking for any sign of an exit. My mind was racing, and every thought seemed to lead me in a circle. Eventually, I just stopped trying to make sense of it all and sat down against a tree, hoping that whatever strange thing was happening would stop if I just gave it time. But it didn't. The forest just kept going on that way. Eventually, I found myself sitting there too exhausted to keep walking. I don't know how long I stayed there, but at some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the light was finally starting to fade. I didn't know if it was morning or evening or if I was still stuck in some eternal loop. All I knew was that I had to get out. I don't know how long it took exactly, but eventually I stumbled upon a trail I did recognize. A few more hours of walking, and I found myself mercifully back at the parking lot, drenched in sweat and shaking. It was dark by the time I got to my car, and I didn't even care about how I looked. I just wanted to leave. My phone finally started working, and that's when things got even stranger. Apparently, I had been out there not on a day hike, but for 3 days. My phone was littered with messages from people asking if I was okay, saying they were going to send searchers out. 3 days. I just wanted to get out of there. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it a strange set of circumstances? Was it just exhaustion messing with my brain? Was it a time glitch or a time loop? Or was there something else in that forest? Something that played with time and space? I don't know, but I can tell you this. I haven't set foot in those woods again, and I don't plan on it. The vanishing footsteps. I started before dawn to beat the heat that clings to the foothills by noon. The trail crossed a dry creek bed, climbed through sage and juniper. The Rockies rise like a wall there, gray teeth with snow still shelved in the far gullies, and the path threads a narrow way between rock and timber. I was aiming for a small lake in a cirque I'd seen from a distance. It wasn't on the glossy maps. Somebody had told me about it in a gear shop, the kind of place that sells old topo quads from a milk crate by the counter. The first miles were mine alone. My breath, my footsteps, the rustle of my pack strap. The sun came into the pines in bands. The air smelled like cold stone and sap. When I stopped to drink, there was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own pulse. I'd hiked alone plenty, and knew the usual sounds. The dry scamper of a chipmunk, the clatter of a grouse blowing out of cover, the hollow thud of my boots finding roots. None of that bothered me. It's the sudden silence in a living place that makes the skin think. I heard the other steps just past the second switchback, where the trail cuts under a short cliff and then bends into a shaded draw. They were not my echoes. Echoes don't breathe and they don't scuff pine needles, and they don't keep the same pace as a man who doesn't want to be caught. But these did. 4 strides after mine every time. Heel toe, heel toe. I stopped and turned. It's an old trick. Animals come out when you go still. People hang back and give themselves away. Nothing moved. I could see 100 yards of trail, back to the wall where the switchback climbed. A jay flicked from one snag to another, and the blue of it looked too bright. I waited long enough to feel foolish, and told myself it was just the forest adding its own sounds to mine. The dirt was dry and the needles lay thick. A place like that can hold 1,000 small noises and break them into patterns that feel like company. I walked on. The steps came again, soft but certain. Heel toe, and then a tiny slide like the weight of a foot, setting and shifting. When I stopped, they stopped. When I took one slow testing step, something behind me set its foot down almost in time, almost willing to be heard. I turned quick and called out, "Hey, coming up behind?" My voice went out along the draw and slid back to me. No reply. The air moved a little, not wind so much as the temperature equalizing between sun and shade. That's what I told myself. I kept a steady pace for the next mile, listening and trying not to be obvious about it. Every time the trail curved, I took the corner wide and glanced back down the open run. Nothing. Just my own tracks in the dust where the tread of my boot stamped a chevron pattern into the powder. The steps behind stayed with me. If I sped up, they did. If I slowed, they eased. I began to think of a dog running silent. I began to think of a cat. By the time the trail narrowed onto a ridge, nothing dramatic, just a little spine with a drop of 50 feet on the right and a couple of broken boulders on the left, the trees crowded close and reached over the path. The shade turned the dust into a dark film that held impressions. I kept looking for prints. Mine were there, clear and alone. Nothing else. That should have helped. It did not. Halfway along that ridge, something changed. The steps no longer came from the ground behind me. They came from above. Not loud or thumping. A weight moving along trunks and limbs, a careful pacing. Bark rasped, needles sifted. I felt peppery grit touch the back of my neck, and knew a branch had shed something right over me. I stopped and pressed my hand to the tree nearest the trail. The bark was cool and ridged. The crown of it met another crown, and that one met another. The canopy made a rough green tunnel. I didn't see anything, but there was the faintest minute stir, the way a body displaces air in a room. I wanted to say it was a squirrel. Squirrels don't weigh as much as a man. This did. The rhythm had the same measured patience as the steps that had kept pace below. If you've ever felt watched by something you can't name, you know the way that time stretches. Heat becomes a sound. The spine grows its own hearing. I told myself to move. Whatever it was, animal or person, I didn't want to be under it. On the far side of the ridge, the trail widened into a small saddle where the soil held water in spring. Even in August, it was softer there. My prints sank deeper. I slowed to study them because they were comfort, proof of myself, of my weight, of the simple fact that the world takes an imprint when you press into it. They were still alone. I went toward the lake. The trees thinned. The path broke into open granite where boot soles bite and chatter. On the slabs, the following steps grew faint, then stopped, as if whoever or whatever had been pacing me did not like the open. The silence that followed had a shape. I stood in it with my hand on a sun-warmed boulder and could feel a choice forming. Keep to the plan and make the lake, or turn back while the air still felt like day. I turned back. I can give you reasons. Monsoon buildups on the horizon, a headache starting behind one eye, a promise to be home for supper. But none of those are true. The truth is, I did not want to give that silence any more of me. Going down is faster. It's also worse for listening because everything rattles and breath rushes and the poles click when they touch stone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, across my own trail. Where the granite gave way to dirt again, I looked for anything but my prints. I found them at the saddle. Not new tracks, not a second set walking beside mine from earlier. My prints were doubled. Each one had a twin inside it, offset by the smallest fraction, and pressed a shade deeper. The chevron of my tread lay in itself like a stamp pressed twice. The edges of the second impression were crisp where mine had softened. Whoever stepped there had stepped after me. A person could do that, step in another's tracks to leave less sign. Hunters do it in snow. It takes practice and a certain malice if you're doing it to somebody who doesn't know that you're there. I crouched and looked harder. My heart ran fast. The second imprint was too perfect. It had found every angle of my weight. Heel first, then the ball, then the push of the toe. If you've ever watched your own stride on a treadmill and seen the same misalignment again and again, then you know what I mean. A shoe wears to a foot. The way I rolled inward, at the last instant, was there and repeated. It was like I was being mocked with a mirror. I stood up slow and let my breath out. "Okay," I said to nothing. Talking helped. I took 3 long steps forward in a patch of looser duff, then stopped and turned. My new prints sat, clean as stamps. No doubling yet. The trees overhead creaked the way trees do when a little gust comes from a direction you didn't feel. I waited. A sprinkle of needles drifted down. Somewhere above, a weight shifted. The duff trembled, the way a table does when the person leaning on it adjusts an elbow. My front print deepened. Nothing touched it that I could see. The edges collapsed as if something had just found the exact hollow my foot had made and set its weight in it. I stepped backward and put my heel into that same print to ruin it. The air felt colder, and my scalp crawled. I made myself do something ordinary. I retied a lace. I drank from my bottle. I told the trees I wasn't afraid, and I was lying. The ridge wasn't far. I wanted the open sky for a minute. I kept moving and didn't look back until the trail narrowed again and the limbs closed over. The world above me had its own map, a grid of trunks and cross branches, a system of roots no boot sole could make. In that green loft, I saw nothing but layered needles and cones. I heard small sounds that could have been anything. I walked with my shoulders hunched against the idea of hands. When the path tilted up under the cliff band where I'd first heard the steps, I let myself stop. I turned and looked down the long straight run that I'd come up at dawn, the same run I had looked down earlier, when I was trying to catch whoever was behind me. On that clean sloped dirt lay a line of prints, mine, doubled from the saddle on, each one with its second shadow pressed inside it. They went away from me into the trees, until the distance made them a stippled dark. That was when the footsteps above me came on faster. Not a run or hurried, but close enough that I could feel them adjust to every motion I made. I put my hand to the rock at my left, and the rock felt like a thing that had watched and had no interest in interfering. I took a step, and something above took the same. There's a rhythm you get when you give up pretending you aren't afraid. It's a clean rhythm. Heel, toe, plant, breathe. I found it, and I held it. I told myself, again, that it was a cat, a person, a trick of sound. But the prints below told the story. Whatever was following did not want to leave its own mark. It wanted to wear mine. It wanted to move exactly as I moved so that the record on the ground would be a single line repeating itself, as if the mountain and I had agreed on a story in which only I existed. At the last switchback, I cut my stride wide and purposefully stepped off the trail into a small triangle of bare, sun-hardened soil that held shape like clay. I pressed my weight in and felt the give. I stood there longer than comfort allowed. Overhead, the pacing stopped. Something settled. The world went back to being all the things it had always been. Rock and tree and sky. And then, without any sound I could name, my footprint deepened again, from heel to toe, as if a careful weight had found the exact cradle I'd made and erased itself inside of it. I did not test it a second time. I did not look for a face in the limbs. I walked out the last of the miles with the sun off the ridges and the smell of dust rising around my ankles. The lot at the trailhead sat empty except for my car and a parked truck with a ticket booth on the dash. The wind had picked up down there, and the pines by the sign whispered in a way that sounded like actual wind. I knocked my boots together and watched the dirt fall. The chevron pattern in the soles looked ordinary and cheap. In the thin film of dust on my tailgate, my fingertip drew a single line and left it. I didn't check to see if it doubled. If you ask me what followed, I'll tell you I don't know. If you ask what it wanted, I'll tell you what I felt. It wanted me to be the only thing that had ever walked that path. It wanted to erase itself by becoming my echo. It moved on the ground until the ground failed it, and then it moved in the trees. And when the ground came back, it stepped into me again, like a hand finding the glove it's worn for years. That night, in my apartment with streetlight coming through the blinds and the refrigerator knocking in the quiet, I heard no footsteps. That's the worst part. Fear would be easier to manage if it kept to the script. What I had instead was the memory of weight. I fell asleep seeing my prints doubled all the way down that mountain, as if the forest had decided that my prints were a path it wanted to keep taking, long after I was gone. The Black Dog That Chased Me Near Cutler Coast by Jenna L. 2 summers ago, I took a solo trip up to Maine. I'd been working in Boston, burned out, and needed quiet. A friend recommended the Cutler Coast Public Reserve, way up near the Canadian border. The trails are rugged and the cliffs are rocky, and the ocean views are incredible, I was told. I drove up and parked at the trailhead, and I planned a one-night hike. It was late afternoon when I set out. The trail wound around through spruce forest, damp and smelling of salt. Eventually, it opened onto cliffs where the ocean slammed against black rock below. The sky was overcast, and the wind was sharp. It felt like standing on the edge of the world. It was a strange kind of beauty, a forgotten kind of thing, but I loved it. By dusk, fog started to roll in, so I set up my tent in a clearing not far from the cliffs, but far enough. I made a quick meal and settled in. The fog muffled everything out there, even the crash of the waves. Around midnight, I awoke to a sound outside, low and rhythmic, like claws clicking on stone. At first I thought maybe it was a coyote or something, but it was heavier and steadier than a coyote would have been. I unzipped the tent a crack and shined my headlamp. A black dog stood in the fog. Now I love dogs, so usually any dog I see, no matter the size, is a friend of mine. But I was immediately terrified of this thing. It was massive. Its shoulders were as high as my chest. Its fur was matted, and it was dark as coal. Its eyes glowed this weird faint red color. It caught the light but never held on to it too long to be a normal reflection. It looked like it was coming from within. I froze. The dog didn't move at first, and then it lowered its head and stepped toward me. I yanked the zipper shut, crawled back into my tent like that would help at all, and then I just waited. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I was trying not to make a sound. I don't know why, it had already seen me. The clicking claws circled the tent. Once, something heavy brushed the fabric and made the walls shudder. I don't think I've ever truly understood the term primal fear until that moment. And then, for whatever reason, the sound broke into a run. I heard it pounding across the rocks, faster and faster, until it faded into the surf. At dawn, I packed up fast and hiked out. Near the cliff edge, I saw paw prints in the wet lichen. Huge, deep, leading right to the drop where the waves smashed below. There were no tracks coming back. It was like the thing had just run off the cliff. Later, somebody told me about the black dog of the coast, an omen that people have claimed to see for generations. Apparently, it's always near storms and always near cliffs, although some people have reported it in the woods and other places as well. I don't really know what it means, and I don't know if that's exactly what I saw. I just know that that dog was not normal. The faint light. I was on Mount St. Helens last fall, late season, when the weather gets unpredictable, but the trails are empty. I had been climbing all day, nothing technical, just a long push past timberline, planning to bivvy on the ridge before dropping back down in the morning. The forecast called for scattered clouds and wind, nothing worse. I had layers, a stove, and a spot that I had used before that gave some shelter from the gusts. By the time I set up camp, it was close to 8 p.m. Twilight was hanging on, but the trees below were already swallowed in black. I cooked quick, ramen, jerky, instant coffee, and then zipped myself into the bivvy. I was tired enough to drift off right away, but the wind had other ideas. It kept gusting and jerking the tarp so hard that it snapped like a sail. I gave up on sleep, put on my shell, and sat outside, just watching the dark settle across the volcano's shoulders. At that point, I started to see this faint light. It wasn't steady like a lantern, but it wasn't bright enough to be a headlamp either. It flickered. It was dim and kind of odd, and it came from higher up the slope, way higher than anyone should have been. That late in the season, nobody is going up there unless they're geared for serious climbing, and there had been nobody signed in at the trailhead register. The light moved and disappeared, and then came back. It almost seemed to be pulsing. My first thought was campfire, but the location didn't really make that much sense. It was too high and perched on a ledge where there's no shelter, and no real reason to stop. It wasn't the orange of a fire anyway. It was just this weak, pale kind of glow. I told myself it had to be a trick. Maybe it was moonlight bouncing off snow. But there was no snow left on that slope. Not that low anyway, and not that patchy. I watched for 10 minutes, maybe more. The light never grew brighter, and it never faded out completely. It just kind of pulsed. Eventually, I convinced myself that it was nothing, and I crawled back into the bivvy. But every time I shut my eyes, the flicker showed up behind my lids. I just couldn't shake it. At some point, I decided I would go check it out in the morning. When dawn came, I packed fast and hiked toward where I'd seen the glow. The slope was rough. Talus, loose scree, but no real trail. I picked my way up, checked the GPS. The spot should have been just below a craggy outcrop. But there was nothing there. There was no fire ring or footprints in the dust or sign of gear, nothing that would indicate somebody had been there. It was just a scatter of rocks and a few stumps and wind. I stood there long enough to feel dumb, and then I turned back. On the descent, I kept glancing over my shoulder. No light. Back at the trailhead, I checked the register again. Still, just my name and nobody else. I've been back on St. Helens since, on different routes and in different seasons, and I've never seen anything like that again. But sometimes I still think about it. It was almost like it was aware of me, or like it wanted me to follow it. And I'm pretty glad that I didn't. The Crimson Watchers by Anonymous. Longtime hiker-camper here, grew up in rural Oregon. Something really weird happened on my last solo trip that I haven't been able to explain. And I guess I just need to get it off my chest. I was doing a 5-day trek through Willamette National Forest last month. First couple of days were pretty normal. It's just me, my gear, the autumn colors, exactly what I wanted. But on day 3, things got really weird. It started off by me getting this really intense feeling of being watched. Not like the normal wilderness vibes. It felt different. More deliberate, I guess. A little bit threatening, if I'm honest. I tried to just brush it off, but I did end up making camp early. I was just so on edge. A little bit later in the night, I started to see these weird flashes through the trees, and when I started to pay more attention, I saw 2 glowing red eyes in the canopy right above my campfire. Not like normal animal eye shine. They were huge, like 6 feet apart, and they had this really weird internal glow. It was almost like embers. They disappeared when I blinked, but that was just the beginning. The next day was a total nightmare of paranoia. I kept seeing these red eyes everywhere. They were always in pairs, always crazy far apart, never in the same place twice. Whatever it was following me. It was like it was playing with its food or something. It all came to a head that night. Around midnight, I woke up to this really bizarre sound. It was almost like a whale call mixed with creaking ship timber. Then I saw them through my tent walls, dozens of pairs of red eyes, blinking in and out, some on the ground, some in the trees, some just floating in midair. I heard these massive footsteps, and like the beat of wings, like a really big bat, just outside. But nothing ever touched my tent, thank God. By dawn, everything disappeared. There were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. I booked it out of there. I hiked 2 days' worth in one. As I drove away, I swear that I saw those red eyes one last time in my rearview mirror, watching from the tree line. It's been 2 weeks. I've looked everywhere online for similar experiences, but found nothing. Part of me wants to report it, but who would believe me? I used to feel at home in the wilderness, but now I can barely look at the trees in my backyard without checking for those eyes. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this in Willamette, or am I just losing it? The Unseen Stalker. I've been solo hiking for about 6 years now, mostly in upstate New York. I've done plenty of trails in the Adirondacks, and never had anything happen that couldn't be explained by normal wildlife. Bears, coyotes, even had a moose encounter once up near Tupper Lake. But what happened to me last October, on the Northville Placid Trail, still has me looking over my shoulder. I was doing a day hike on a section near Lake Durant, maybe 8 miles north of Blue Mountain Lake. Started around 7 a.m. on a Saturday in late October. It was perfect hiking weather, cool but not too cold, and the leaves were just starting to turn. The trail was in pretty good shape, and I was making decent time. About 2 hours in, I started to get this feeling like someone was behind me. You know that prickly sensation you get when someone's staring at you? It was like that, but stronger. It made me turn around a few times, but I never saw anything. Around mile 4, I started hearing footsteps. Not constantly, just every now and then when I'd pause to catch my breath or take a drink. It sounded like someone walking on the trail maybe 50 yards back. The same rhythm as hiking footsteps. Crunch, crunch, pause, repeat. But every time I would stop and listen, the sounds would stop too. At first I figured it was probably just another hiker keeping their distance. Some people like a lot of space on the trail, and I get that. But whenever I would call out a hello or good morning, there was never any response. The weird part was how precisely the footsteps matched my pace. They always stayed about the same distance behind me too, and they always stopped the exact moment I did. After about an hour of this, I decided to test it. I found a good spot where the trail curved around a big boulder and ducked behind it to wait. I figured whoever was following me would have to come around the bend within a few minutes. I waited there for 20 minutes and no one ever came around that corner. But the second I stepped back onto the trail and started walking again, the footsteps started up behind me. That's when I got seriously uncomfortable. I picked up my pace, trying to put some distance between me and whoever was back there. The footsteps picked up too, matching me step for step. Still, I couldn't see anything when I would turn around, but I could feel something there, like a weight in the air behind me. Around mile 6, I came to a section where the trail opens up into a small meadow. There was good visibility in all directions, and there was nowhere for anybody to hide. I stopped in the middle of the clearing and did a full 360-degree scan with my binoculars. Nothing. There was no movement. No sign of life except for a few chipmunks. but I could still feel eyes on me. And when I started walking again, the footsteps resumed immediately. The last 2 miles to my turnaround point were the longest of my hiking career. The presence behind me felt closer somehow, more insistent. A couple of times I thought I heard breathing that was not mine, but every time I would stop to listen and hold my breath, there was just normal forest silence. At the 8-mile mark, I reached a small lake where I had originally planned to have lunch. But I was too rattled to sit still. I just turned around and started the hike back, hoping that whatever was following me would lose interest. It didn't. The footsteps were there for the entire return trip, always the exact same distance behind me, always stopping whenever I would stop. By the time I got back to the trailhead, I was practically sprinting. I just wanted to get to my car. When I reached the parking area, I turned around one last time to look back at the trail. I still saw nothing, but I could still feel something watching me from the tree line. I didn't relax until I was in my car with the doors locked. I asked around on some hiking forums about similar experiences. I got the usual suggestions. Black bear following scent trails, echo effects making my own footsteps sound like they were coming from behind me, auditory hallucinations from hiking alone too much. But none of it felt right. Bears don't walk in perfect sync with humans for 8 miles. Echoes don't create distinct footstep sounds that stop and start independently. And I've done hundreds of solo hikes without hallucinating phantom followers. I did some research on that particular section of trail. I found out there's some local folklore about a shadow walker in that area, something that follows hikers, but never shows itself. Old Adirondack guides used to warn people about it back in the logging days. Supposedly it's harmless but persistent, just shadows people through the forest for reasons no one understands. It could be complete nonsense, but it made me feel a little bit better knowing that other people had reported similar experiences. I've been back to the Adirondacks since then, but I stick to more popular trails with heavier foot traffic. I haven't done any solo hiking in that area again. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild after too many hours alone in the woods, but I don't need to find out. The thing that still really gets under my skin about all of it is how intelligent it felt. It didn't feel like an animal following a scent or reacting on instinct. It felt very deliberate, mimicking my movements and staying just out of sight, almost like it was enjoying the game. Whatever it was, it knew exactly how to stay hidden while making sure that I knew it was there. And that takes a kind of awareness that doesn't fit with any wildlife I know about. Hopefully, whatever it was, I'll never face it again. I Saw a Gray Man in the Smokies by Daniel H. A few summers back, I section hiked part of the Appalachian Trail with my brother. We'd planned about a week through the Smokies, nothing extreme, just steady miles. The weather was decent, humid, fog hanging in the valleys in the morning, thunderstorms late in the day. On the third night, we pitched our tent a little off the trail near Klingman's Dome. It was a quiet spot under spruce trees, ground soft with needles. By dusk, fog rolled in heavy, swallowing the ridgeline. You couldn't see more than 20 feet. We ate, hung the food bag, and turned in. Around midnight, I woke up needing to relieve myself. I stepped outside with my headlamp. The fog was thick, light bouncing back so badly I could barely make out the first row of trees. I walked a short way, picked a tree, and that's when I noticed something standing deeper in the mist. At first I thought it was another hiker. They were tall and thin, and had gray clothes on that blended in with the fog. But the longer I looked, the more strange I felt. It was too tall, and their shoulders were too narrow. And most of all, they didn't have a pack. I clicked off my light. The shape didn't move. It just stood there, faint in the haze. I waited, barely breathing. I was still trying to figure out if it was a tree or maybe some kind of weird twig formation or something. A minute passed. 2. I finally whispered my brother's name. The figure stepped forward. Not fast, just one long stride closer. Silent. I ducked back into the tent, my heart slamming against my ribcage. My brother mumbled, half asleep, but I didn't explain. I just sat there, listening. For hours, I swore I heard faint steps outside. Not circling, not rushing, just shifting weight. Almost like somebody was standing and swaying. When dawn came, the fog burned off. The woods looked normal again. There were no prints in the needles, no sign that anyone had been there at all. We packed up and kept moving. I didn't tell my brother until days later. He said he had heard the steps too, but thought that it was me, pacing. The eyes in the woods. When I was camping in Oregon with some friends, we decided to hike at night for fun. The trail was pitch black except for our flashlights. You can see a lot of cool stuff out there at night. Different wildlife. I don't know, it's just a different experience. And for the most part, we were enjoying it. At one point, we noticed these glowing eyes off the trail. There were 2 sets, and then 3, and then even more. At first, we thought we'd stumbled upon some deer, but the eyes were too high and too far apart. And they never really blinked, they just followed us as we moved. The really strange part, though, is that when we stopped and looked at them, the eyes closed one by one. It kind of looked like whatever was watching us just sank into the ground. We turned around and went back to camp without saying a word, and we do not night hike anymore. I saw something move in the fog at Mount Washington by Alex G. I don't usually talk about this because people either laugh or tell me that I must have been tired. Maybe I was, but I know what I saw, and it was not just exhaustion. In 2019, I did a summer hike with 2 friends up at Mount Washington in New Hampshire. If you know the place, you know the weather can turn brutal fast. Winds can hit hurricane levels even in July. People die there every year from exposure. We weren't climbing unprepared. We had decent gear, tents, maps, the whole deal. But we decided to stay overnight near the summit, which I deeply regret. The first day was fine. Hard climb, hot sun, sweaty as hell. When we reached the upper section, the clouds had started to roll in. By the time we found a flat enough area to pitch camp, the whole mountain was wrapped in fog. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. The rocks, the cairns, everything looked like ghosts. We set up fast, made dinner on the little camp stove, and then sat wrapped in jackets. It was cold, damp, and quiet. Around 10, my 2 friends went into the tent. I stayed out, watching the fog churn past my headlamp. It was kind of hypnotic, the way the mist kept folding and stretching. But then I saw something weird. At first, it looked like another hiker coming up the slope. A figure, tall and thin, moving through the fog, maybe, 20 yards away. I clicked my light toward it. Nothing. just rocks. I figured I had imagined it. Headlamp shadows can play tricks when you're tired. I went into the tent and zipped up. Sometime after midnight, I woke up needing to pee. I unzipped the flap and stepped out. The fog was thicker than it had been before, so heavy it almost felt like wool against my face. I walked a few yards from the tent, and my headlamp beam was kind of bouncing. It was short and weak, but I figured it was enough to get me out there so I could do my business and then get back. But halfway through, I froze. There was someone standing in the fog, some tall gray shape just at the edge of the light. I muttered, "Hello?" My voice sounded small against the mist. The figure tilted. Not its head, but the whole body leaned kind of slow and unnatural, and then straightened again. I backed up until I felt the tent at my heels. The figure didn't move. It didn't vanish like it had before, it just stood there. It looked kind of half dissolved in the fog. It was faint, but solid enough that my brain screamed, "Person." But no hiker would be out wandering at 1 a.m, without a pack, without a light, and completely silent. I ducked back inside the tent. My heart was pounding like crazy. My friends asked me what was wrong, but I said not to worry about it. I mean, what could I say? For the next few hours, I didn't sleep at all. I laid awake, listening. More than once, I thought I heard footsteps crunching on the rock outside. I heard somebody kind of messing around with the stuff that was out there. We just had some tin dishes and stuff like that. By the time I woke up, I guess at some point I did fall asleep, the fog was gone and the sun was up. The slope was completely empty. It was just the rocks, cairns, our tent, and nothing else. But about 30 feet from camp, I found prints. They were long and narrow and pressed deep into the gravel, and ended abruptly where the fog had thinned. They weren't boot prints either. I didn't say a word to my friends. We packed up and got off the mountain, and to this day, they have no idea what I encountered out there. And to be fair, neither do I. This happened to me 2 summers ago when I was visiting my sister up in Hayward. I'm from Illinois originally, so I don't get to the Northwoods much. But when I do, I try to get in some hiking. My sister recommended the Ice Age Trail section that runs through Chequamegon National Forest. Said it was nice, an easy day hike, with some decent scenery. It sounded right up my alley. Started out at about 10 a.m. on what had to be one of the hottest days of the year. It was maybe 87 degrees with about 90% humidity. Typical miserable Midwest summer weather. I was already sweating by the time I got my pack on in the parking area near County Road GG. The trail was exactly what my sister had described. It was well maintained, and it ran through mixed hardwood forest, mostly maple and oak, with some birch mixed in. Nothing too challenging. It was just a nice walk through the woods, and it was perfect from getting away from the heat and humidity. About 3 miles in, I came to the spot where the trail curved around a small depression in the forest floor. Maybe 30 feet across, nothing dramatic. It was just this little hollow thing where the ground dipped down slightly. I wouldn't have even thought about it just on sight, but as soon as I got within maybe 10 feet of it, the temperature dropped. I mean, dropped like I had walked into a walk-in freezer. I'm not talking about the normal forest shade being cooler than the direct sunlight. I'm not an idiot. I know that happens. But this was like stepping from summer into the middle of January. It had to have been at least a 40-degree difference. I went from profusely sweating in 87-degree heat to seeing my breath fog up in the space of 2 steps. The cold was so intense it actually hurt, like when you jump into an ice-cold lake and your chest seizes up. I could feel it cutting right through my hiking clothes, making my skin almost burn with that sharp, cold sensation that you get if you touch something frozen. But here's the really weird part. The cold seemed to have boundaries. I could step backward like 3 feet and be back in the normal summer heat, and then step forward and hit this wall of freezing air again. It was like there was some kind of an invisible refrigeration unit running right there in the middle of the forest. I tried walking around the edge of whatever was causing it. The cold spot seemed to follow that natural depression in the ground, maybe 20 or 30 feet in diameter. Everywhere else felt normal, but that one area was like stepping into a freaking meat locker. There just wasn't an explanation for it. There was no stream or pond that might create a cooler microclimate. There was no cave opening or underground spring, just a normal Wisconsin forest floor, covered in dead leaves and fallen branches. But the air in that depression was cold enough to make me shiver uncontrollably after about 30 seconds of exposure. I've heard about cold spots in supposedly haunted places, but in the middle of a national forest, on a hiking trail, it's not exactly your typical ghost story setting. But whatever was causing it just felt wrong. Not like just the cold part, but it was, I don't know, actively hostile. Like something was trying to drive me away from that spot. After about 5 minutes of trying to figure out what in the world could cause something like that, I figured it was best to just keep hiking. There's plenty of weird natural phenomena in the world, right? No point in getting obsessed over it. But when I tried to continue on the trail, which ran right through the edge of the cold area, I couldn't do it. The cold was too intense. Every time that I tried to push through, it was like my body was refusing to cooperate. Every survival instinct I had was just screaming at me to get away from that place. I ended up having to bushwhack around it, fighting through thick underbrush for maybe 50 yards to get back to the trail on the other side. But that's actually when things got really unsettling. As soon as I got past the cold spot and back onto the main trail, I started getting this really weird, crawling sensation between my shoulder blades. It's that feeling you get when someone's staring at you. I kept turning around to look back, but I couldn't see anything unusual through the trees. I figured that as I kept going, whatever that feeling was would decrease, especially if it had come from that area. But the feeling actually got stronger as I hiked away. Every few minutes, I kept looking back, expecting to see someone or something following me, but I never saw anything. But the sensation of being watched was so intense it made my skin crawl. After about a mile, I just couldn't take it anymore. I turned around and I hiked back toward the cold spot, thinking maybe I could get a better look at it from a different angle. But when I got to where it should have been, I couldn't find it. I mean, I found the depression in the forest floor, that same little hollow in the same general area, but the temperature was completely normal. Just regular summer heat and humidity, like everywhere else in the forest. I spent probably 20 minutes walking around that area, checking with my thermometer app, trying to recreate the experience. Everything felt perfectly fine, but I knew that I had not imagined it. My water bottle was still ice cold from the few minutes it had spent in that freezing air. I hiked back out without any more weird experiences. I asked my sister about it when I got back to her place. She's lived in Hayward for 8 years and hikes those trails all the time, but she said that she'd never heard of anything like what I described. I did some research online later, though. I found a few mentions of cold spots in the Chequamegon area, mostly on paranormal forums. People had reported similar experiences, sudden temperature drops in certain locations, feelings of being watched, and general sense of unease type of stuff, but nothing official. Most likely explanation, I suppose, is probably some kind of natural phenomenon. Underground water flows, geological features, air currents. Nothing that I know to be there, but you never know. Maybe it is. Plenty of things could create a temporary, localized temperature difference, I suppose. But the intensity of it, and how it seemed to have such sharp boundaries, that just didn't feel natural. And I can't explain the feeling of being watched afterward. That followed me for the entire hike back to the parking area. It was like something from that cold spot was tracking my movement through the forest, making sure that I didn't come back. I've been up to visit my sister twice since that happened, but I haven't done any more hiking in Chequamegon. She keeps suggesting other trails in the area, but something about that forest just feels off to me now. Like there are places that people aren't supposed to go, and it's one of them. Don't go hiking alone in the Olympics. I used to roll my eyes whenever someone brought up Bigfoot encounters. I've spent my entire adult life hiking solo, especially here in the Olympic Peninsula, in western Washington. Miles and miles of untouched wilderness, mossy trees dripping with water, dense underbrush, and the thickest silence you've ever experienced. That's always been my refuge. But something happened last October that's made me reconsider every dismissive thought I've ever had about the supernatural. I'd planned a 3-day solo hike along the Hoh River Trail near Forks, Washington. Pretty standard stuff. I've done it plenty of times, but this time it was different. It had been raining non-stop for a week, and the trail conditions were terrible, but I was stubborn. I'd planned this for months, and I wasn't about to let some mud and drizzle stop me. By the time I parked my car at the trailhead, it was pouring buckets. The rain hammered down relentlessly, soaking me through within minutes, despite my waterproof gear. The forest seemed even denser than usual, a murky wall of dripping green and gray. I pushed ahead anyway, boots squelching in ankle-deep mud, determined not to turn back. About 4 miles in, the weather worsened. The sky darkened prematurely, shrouding everything in a thick twilight. My pace slowed to a cautious shuffle. Visibility sucked. The trees bent under the weight of rainwater, groaning as wind rushed through them. That's when the first weird thing happened. I was crossing a small clearing when an intense feeling of dread slammed into me out of nowhere. It was like an icy fist clenched around my gut. I froze in place, heart racing, eyes darting around the gloom. I saw nothing. Just trees, mist, and the constant downpour. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I moved on, trying to shrug it off as paranoia. Maybe the weather had finally gotten to me. Maybe I was exhausted, cold, and hungry. But the sensation lingered, getting stronger the deeper that I went. By dusk, I found a tiny, relatively dry patch of ground tucked beneath a massive cedar. I pitched my tent hurriedly, fingers numb from the cold, desperate to escape the unrelenting rain. Once inside, I tried to get comfortable, but sleep eluded me. Outside, the forest noises were louder than normal, branches cracking, rustling leaves, and occasional thuds that seemed far too heavy to be falling limbs. Just after midnight, I woke suddenly, heart hammering. At first, I wasn't sure why, but soon I heard it. A heavy, rhythmic crunching, slow and deliberate. It wasn't just footsteps. Each step resonated with power and weight. Whatever was out there was huge. My blood went cold. Every instinct told me not to move, not to breathe. The footsteps circled slowly around my tent, pausing every now and then, as if examining my presence. And then they stopped, right behind my head. That's when the second strange thing happened, the telepathy or whatever you want to call it. I've never experienced anything remotely similar, and I don't even fully understand it. But suddenly, clear as day, a thought pushed into my mind. You shouldn't be here. It wasn't my thought, and yet it resonated as if someone had whispered it right in my ear. It felt invasive, like a violation, yet oddly calm at the same time. And then, silence. I mean, complete silence. No footsteps, no rain, nothing. Just my breath, ragged and shallow. For minutes, I lay rigid in my sleeping bag, terrified to even blink. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I fell into a restless sleep filled with vague nightmares about being chased through the woods. When dawn finally broke, I emerged cautiously from my tent. The rain had let up somewhat, leaving behind a damp, oppressive fog that hugged the ground. I circled my campsite, looking for evidence, footprints, broken branches, anything. But the ground was too wet and muddy to show anything definitive. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the entire thing, until I started breaking down my tent. And that's when I saw it, about 30 yards away between two massive trees, a figure standing motionless, watching me. At first, my brain couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was massive, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, covered head to toe in shaggy dark fur. The shoulders were impossibly broad, the limbs long and thick. But it was the face that really made my stomach drop. Human-like, but distorted. Deep-set eyes peering straight into mine. It didn't move. It didn't blink. And then, clearly and unmistakably, that same calm, invasive thought broke through my mind again. You shouldn't be here. I bolted, leaving half my gear scattered behind. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted down the trail, branches clawing at my face, roots snagging my boots. I didn't stop until I reached my car, panting, soaked in sweat and rain, heart nearly bursting from my chest. Driving home, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear, maybe some kind of hallucination brought on by hypothermia or stress. But deep down, I knew better. Bears don't stand perfectly still, staring at you, with thoughtful, human-like expressions. Bears certainly don't communicate thoughts directly into your head. Since then, I've scoured forums and listened to podcasts, trying to find someone else who's had a similar encounter. And I have found them. Stories from other solo hikers who have felt the same strange, telepathic warning from creatures matching exactly what I saw. I haven't been back to the Olympics since. Honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. But one thing's for certain. I won't be mocking Bigfoot stories anymore. There's something out there, and it's intelligent, powerful, and incredibly real. I saw something in the Porcupine Mountains that was not a bear, by Marcus T. So this happened in October 2023, and I still don't know what to make of it. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just putting it out there because I need to tell someone who isn't going to look at me like I've lost it. I'd been planning this trip to the Porcupines for months. The Porcupine Mountains are way up in the western Upper Peninsula, right on Lake Superior. It's proper wilderness up there, not the kind of state park where you're sharing trails with strollers and people walking their dogs. I wanted to do the Lake of the Clouds overlook and then hike down into the valley, maybe camp near the Carp River. I'd done plenty of solo trips before. I'm comfortable in the woods. I know what I'm doing. The weather was perfect that first day. Cold but clear, leaves mostly down. I got to the overlook around noon and, yeah, it's as gorgeous as everyone says. The escarpment drops off and you can see the whole valley stretched out below. All these ridges covered in forest going on forever. Took my photos, ate a sandwich, started down. The trail gets steep, fast. Your knees feel it. But it's well marked and I made good time. I was planning to camp somewhere along the river that night and then loop back the next day. By 4 or so, I found a decent spot. Flat ground near the water, a good distance from the trail. I set up my tent and got my bear hang sorted and made dinner, standard stuff. I'm not going to say I heard something weird that night because I didn't. I slept fine and woke up around 7 when it was light enough to see. And that's when things got strange. My campsite looked normal. Everything was where I had left it. But there were tracks in the dirt around my tent that definitely had not been there the night before. Big tracks. I'm talking probably 14 inches long, maybe more. They were shaped wrong for bear tracks, though. Bears have that distinctive toe pattern, and these were different. The toes were longer. The overall shape was more human-like, but scaled up. I've seen bear tracks plenty of times. These weren't bear tracks. I told myself it was probably just a weird print, maybe where a bear stepped funny on the dirt, or the dirt was soft in a way that distorted things. I took a few pictures on my phone. The prints circled my tent maybe twice, and then headed off toward the river. I should have packed up right then, I know that now. But it was broad daylight and I felt stupid for being nervous about some footprints. I made coffee, broke down camp, and started hiking. The plan was to follow the river east for a few miles and then cut back up to the ridge trail. It's beautiful down in that valley. The Carp River is this dark tea color from all the tannins, and it moves fast over the rocks. Lots of old-growth hemlocks. Really quiet except for the water. Around mid-morning, I stopped to filter water from the river. I was crouched down by the bank, pump filter going, when I got this feeling. You know the one, like someone's watching you. I looked up and scanned the trees across the river, maybe 40 feet away. There was something standing there. It was behind a big hemlock, but I could see that it was tall taller than a person. The proportions were wrong for a bear standing up. It was too narrow and upright. I couldn't see details because of the shadows and the tree trunk blocking out most of it, but I could see enough to know that it wasn't moving like an animal. It was just standing there, still, watching me. My brain was doing this thing where it kept trying to make it into something normal. A stump, a shadow, some trick of the light, but I was looking right at it, and whatever it was looking back at me. I could feel it. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just remember my hands unscrewing the filter, shoving it in my pack, and standing up. Some part of me knew that running would be bad, but I walked back fast the way I'd come, and I didn't look behind me until I had put maybe a quarter mile between me and that spot. I hiked out that day instead of staying a second night. I told myself that I just wasn't feeling it, that I'd come back another time, but I have not been back. The thing is, I've been trying to research this since I got home. There are some stories about something in the UP called the Michigan Dog Man, but that's supposed to be more canine, and what I saw seemed more ape-like. Some people talk about Bigfoot sightings in the area. I don't know what I think about any of that. I just know that what I saw was not a bear, and it wasn't a person, and it moved in a way that made my stomach drop. I still have the photos of the tracks on my phone. I've shown them to exactly 2 people, both friends who camp. One said it was definitely a bear, just at a weird angle. The other one looked at them for a long time, and then handed my phone back, and never said anything. I'm not going to say that it was definitely a cryptid or whatever. I'm just saying that I saw something in the woods that I can't explain, and I have no interest in going back to find out what it was. The mist in the Smokies. I'm probably going to sound completely insane posting this, but I just need to get it out there. It's been eating at me for like 3 months now. This happened in February on the Cataract Falls Trail, near Elkmont in the Smokies. I know. Who the hell goes night hiking in February in Tennessee? But I work third shift, and my sleep schedule is completely backwards anyway. Plus, the trail is only about 2.5 miles round trip, and I'd already done it maybe a dozen times during the daylight. I figured it would be a nice way to clear my head after a rough week. I started the hike at about 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. No moon, but I had a decent headlamp, and the trail is pretty well marked. The temperature was maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Not terrible for winter hiking. The plan was simple. Get to the waterfall, take a break, and hike back to my car. Everything was normal for the first hour or so. I saw a few deer, heard some owls, typical mountain night sounds. I made it to the falls right on schedule, sat on the usual rock outcropping, and ate a granola bar. That's when I noticed the fog starting to roll in. At first, it looked normal. Just low clouds moving through the valleys, like you see all the time in the Smokies. But as I watched it, something started to feel really off about the way it was moving. It was too fast. And also, it just seemed like it had, intention. Like it was flowing uphill in places where it should have been settling into the low spots. I figured I should probably head back before visibility got too bad. I started down the return trail with my headlamp cutting through patches of mist that were getting thicker by the minute. About 10 minutes into the hike back, the fog got seriously dense. I'm talking can't see your hand in front of your face thick. My headlamp beam was basically useless, just a lit-up wall of white about 3 feet ahead of me. But here's the weird part. I wasn't really worried about getting lost. I could still feel the trail under my feet. Solid packed dirt, occasional roots and rocks in all the familiar places. I knew this path well enough to navigate it mostly by feel, if I had to. The fog felt strange, though. Not cold and damp like normal mountain mist. It was almost warm, and it had this weird electrical feeling to it. You know when you rub a balloon on your hair and you feel that static charge? The hair on my arms was standing up inside my jacket, just like that. I kept walking, following what I was sure was the trail. I lost track of time completely. It could have been 20 minutes, it could have been 2 hours. The fog seemed to be moving around me, swirling in patterns that didn't match any wind I could feel. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of shapes in the mist that looked almost like people, but when I would stop and stare, there wouldn't be anything there. Then, the fog suddenly just lifted, like someone had thrown a switch. 1 second, I couldn't see anything. The next, I was standing in clear mountain air, under a sky full of stars. The problem was, I had no idea where the hell I was. I was definitely still in the mountains. I could see the familiar ridgelines of the Smokies around me. But I was standing in the middle of what looked like an old logging road, not the Cataract Falls Trail. And according to my phone's GPS, I was about 8 miles southeast of where I'd started, near the Oconaluftee River. 8 miles, in what felt like maybe an hour tops of walking through fog. I tried retracing my steps, but I couldn't find any trail that led back the way I'd come. The logging road that I was on wasn't even on my GPS app. It just showed a blank green space. My phone said that it was 4:17 a.m., which means I'd somehow lost about 4 hours. I had to call a buddy to come pick me up. It took him 2 hours to find me, even with GPS coordinates, because the logging road was so overgrown and unmarked. When he finally did show up, the first thing he said was that I looked like I'd been sleepwalking. Apparently, I was just standing there staring off into space when his headlights hit me. We drove back to get my car from the Cataract Falls trailhead. It was exactly where I'd left it, completely normal, no signs that anything weird had happened there. My friend kept telling me I had some kind of episode, hypothermia or dehydration causing confusion and memory loss. But I felt physically fine. I had no headache, no dizziness, no signs of exposure. Plus, I'd only been out there for like 5 total hours, hardly enough time for serious hypothermia in 35-degree weather when I was well dressed. The park rangers I talked to the next day were polite, but clearly thought I'd just gotten turned around in a normal fog and wandered off trail. Happens all the time, they said. People think they know where they are in the fog, but it can be disorienting. Yeah, I know that. But I know that trail. I've hiked it in rain, snow, early morning, late evening. I've never gotten lost. I've never even taken a wrong turn. And there's no way you can accidentally hike 8 miles through trackless forest in a few hours without realizing it. The thing that bothers me more than anything is the missing time. I have no memory of those hours between entering the fog and it suddenly clearing. Not even fragments or impressions, just a complete blank. I've been back to both areas since then, the original trail and the logging road where I ended up, during daylight and with other people. Everything looks normal. The Cataract Falls Trail is exactly as I remember it. The logging road It's just an abandoned Forest Service road that dead ends after about a mile. But I measured the distance between them on Google Earth. It's 7.8 miles of mostly trackless mountain forest. Even if I had somehow followed deer paths and creek beds the whole way, it should have taken me at least 6 hours of hard hiking in the daylight, not 4 hours stumbling through fog so thick that I couldn't see my own feet. I still go night hiking sometimes, but not in the Smokies, and definitely not when there's any chance of fog. Hair-Raising Hike by Altril 2010, posted to r/deepwoodscreepy. About 6 years ago, I was in fantastic shape and used to take my then toddler on long day hikes in our local woods or state parks around Oregon. One Saturday, we decided to do a 10-mile loop around a local reservoir. We packed a lunch so we could stop midpoint. I also always packed my kiddo a second set of clothes due to their proclivity for finding gross things. As was usual, said toddler had a lot of energy at the beginning of the hike and would run 20 yards or so in front of me, stop to look at plants, help me identify things near the trail, and of course, find a good stick. After about 3 miles, the 4-year-old wanted to be carried for a bit. No biggie. Hoisted the tot up onto my shoulders, and off we went. We reached the half-mile point. The day was a beautiful April in Oregon. We had encountered a small drizzle early on, but that just delighted the small one. Temperatures were such that a light flannel shirt was perfect, and I rolled up my sleeves after walking 2 miles with an extra 40 pounds on my shoulders. We ate lunch and continued on our way. About a half mile after eating, my 4-year-old's demeanor began to change. They became quiet and didn't want to run down the path or engage in looking at plants. I thought maybe they were just tired and our lunch break hadn't been long enough, but we continued on. Soon, I noticed that the ever-present sounds in the woods had stopped. It was eerily quiet, and all I could hear was the sounds of our feet hitting the ground. The hair on the back of my neck started to prickle. I only had my hunting axe with me, so I found a hefty stick for myself. My 4-year-old asked if we could turn around. This kid does not like to turn around, especially on loop hikes. I didn't hesitate and said yes. I managed to fit them against my back and used my backpack to keep them in place, kind of like a baby carrier. My head was on a swivel as I quickly walked back the way we came. After about a quarter mile, the feeling of unease and being watched receded. The normal noises of birds, insects, frogs, etc. all resumed. A couple days later, I saw on a local Facebook post that a logging crew, who was on the opposite side of the hill we had hiked, had spotted a mama mountain lion and her cub. No idea if that's what had me and my kiddo spooked, but it was definitely the most scared I'd ever felt on a hike. We went back a couple of months after that and brought my husband with us. We did the whole loop and never encountered that feeling again. The Silent Woods. I live near the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, and I hike there pretty much from May to October. A few years ago, I decided to hike a pretty strenuous trail that leads to a huge rock slide. I parked and noticed that I was the only person there. I had my 2 dogs with me, so I got them out and started up the trail. About a mile in, I came to a clearing that had a huge teepee-like structure in it. The trees were all woven together. I put down my walking stick and stopped to take pictures. It seemed weird, but it also seemed kind of cool. After taking the pictures, I moved up the trail. As soon as I passed the tree structure, I immediately felt like I was being watched, and the woods went silent. It was so strange. No bugs, no birds, no small animal noises, just dead silent. I hike by myself all the time, and I don't usually get creeped out or scared. I've seen bears, and I'm pretty sure that there are cougars in the area, but I kept going. The feeling of being watched only got more intense. My dogs, who are experienced trail dogs, started acting weird. They stayed super close to me, not making much noise, which was unusual for them. I realized that I had left my walking stick down by the tree structure. I didn't want to go back down and get it, and then have to hike back up, so I just kept going. I was about a quarter mile past the tree structure when the feeling of being watched became unbearable. I tried to rationalize it, thinking that it might be a big cat. So I decided to head back down. The rational part of my brain told me to slow down, but my flight response kicked in. I sprinted full speed down the 30 to 40 degree slope. When I got back to the tree structure and meadow, I looked down, and my walking stick was gone. It was nowhere to be seen. It was pretty distinct, too, because it was made from aspen, and I'd picked it up somewhere else, and there are no aspens in this part of the forest. I was absolutely terrified. I kept running, feeling like I was being chased, but I never saw anything. I never heard anything either. Yes, it could have been a big cat, but why would it only start after I passed the tree structure? And how did my walking stick disappear? Last time I checked, big cats don't need those. I didn't stop running until I was nearly back to the parking lot, and that's when the feeling of being watched and chased finally left me. I will never, ever go back there. Just thinking about it still gives me the creeps. Rangers Don't Hike Devil's Staircase After Dark by Kevin H. I've been a park ranger at Zion for 3 years, and there's exactly one trail that I will not set foot on after sunset. Not for lost hikers, not for medical emergencies, not for anything. Devil's Staircase can wait until morning. The trail isn't officially called that. On the maps, it's listed as the Upper Emerald Pools Connector, but every ranger who's worked there more than a season calls it Devil's Staircase. There's a section about halfway up where the trail cuts through this narrow slot canyon, and the rock formations create these natural steps that go up maybe 200 feet at a steep angle, hence the name. It's a popular trail during the day. Moderate difficulty, good views, connects to some of the main attractions. We get probably 100 or so hikers on it every day during peak season. At night, it's different. I first heard about it during my training. My supervisor mentioned in passing that if we got a call about someone needing assistance on that trail after dark, we should stage at the trailhead and wait for backup before going in. He didn't explain why. He just said it was policy. I figured it was because of the terrain. The steps are uneven, and there's some exposure. Easy to fall if you're not careful. It made sense to wait for a full team. Then, I met Garrett. He'd been working at Zion for 12 or 13 years, and he told me the real reason. We were doing a routine patrol last spring, checking the backcountry sites, and we passed the Devil's Staircase trailhead around 7 in the evening. Still had good light. Garrett stopped and looked up the trail for a long time, Then he asked if anyone had told me about the girl. I said, "No, what girl?" He said there's a girl who hikes Devil's Staircase at night, alone. Rangers have been seeing her for at least 20 years. It's always the same description. 16 or 17 years old, long dark hair, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. There's no pack or headlamp or any gear at all. She just walks up the trail at a normal pace. If you call out to her, she doesn't respond. If you try to follow her, she disappears. I asked if he was messing with me. He said no, that he'd seen her himself twice. Once in 2015 and once in 2019. Both times right around dusk. Both times, she was walking up the trail like she was just out for an evening stroll. The first time he had tried to catch up to her. He figured she was a lost hiker who needed help getting back before dark. He had jogged after her, and she had rounded a corner up ahead. When he got to the same corner maybe 10 seconds later, she was gone. The trail was empty in both directions. The second time, he had just watched her go. He didn't see any point in chasing something he couldn't catch. I asked if anybody knew who she was. He said that there were theories. A girl had died on that trail in 1987, fell from the steps during a storm. But she'd been 12, not 16, and the descriptions didn't match. Some rangers thought it might be older than that, maybe someone before the park was established. I didn't think much about it until last October. I was finishing a late shift, and I got a radio call about a possible distressed hiker on Devil's Staircase. A couple coming down had seen somebody heading up alone without any gear, and they were worried. I drove to the trailhead. It was almost 8, nearly full dark. I grabbed my flashlight and started up. I got to the steps, and I heard footsteps above me. Steady rhythm. Someone walking up. I called out, but no response. I climbed faster. The footsteps stayed the same distance ahead. I could hear them clearly. Boots on stone, never speeding up or slowing down. I got to the top of the steps and the sound stopped. I swept my flashlight across the area, but there was nobody there. The trail continues past the steps, but I could see a good 100 yards in both directions. If anyone had been there, I would have seen them. I radioed back that I had checked the trail and found no one and hiked back down. When I got back to my truck, Garrett was waiting. He asked me if I didn't remember the policy, and I said, no, I'd kind of forgotten about it. I figured I would just go check. He had heard my radio traffic, and he drove over. He asked if I had heard the footsteps, and I said yeah. He nodded like he expected it. He told me the footsteps are worse than seeing her, because when you hear them, you know she's close. Sometimes right next to you, even though you can't see anything. Wish I'd known that ahead of time. I don't hike Devil's Staircase after dark anymore. The policy makes perfect sense now. My Experience in the Woods by Southern List 3207, posted to r/backwoodscreepy. I'm fairly new to Reddit, so I only discovered this sub recently, and I'm using a throwaway because I didn't feel comfortable enough sharing this on my main account. I've lurked here for a little while, and I think it's the perfect place to share the story of an experience that I had about 9 or 10 years ago now. The reason I'm sharing this is A, because that's the point of the sub, and B, because I'm honestly curious to see if anybody else has had a similar experience, or if you have any idea of what this could have been, because I've never been able to figure it out. Before I start, I've told this story to lots of people over the years. Friends, family, even acquaintances whenever supernatural or scary stuff has come up in conversation. But I've always left out the finer details on purpose, because honestly, I think I still have some latent trauma from it. I don't really like going into detail about it or reliving this experience. Instead, I have only ever recounted this as a 60-second scary story to elicit a reaction, probably as a coping mechanism. My girlfriend is the only person I have ever told the full story to. To be clear, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything here. You can believe what you want, and I respect your opinion. But I'm also not going to debate or argue over something that I know to be true. This experience happened when I was wild camping on my own in a forest in Wales. I live in England, near the Welsh border. This is something I've done dozens of times and continue to do to this day. I think it was April or May of 2013 or 2014. The weather was unseasonably good, and this was the second of 3 nights that I had planned for my trip, although it ended up being the last. First night and second day had been great. Got a lovely long hike in, followed by a pub lunch. I'd driven back to the area I was staying in, and I was now back at my tent. I settled down for the night, read a book, had some beers, and went to sleep. It was probably between 11 p.m. and midnight. I was just in that state where you're semi-conscious, about to drift off, but haven't quite just yet. I slowly became aware of a melodic noise somewhere outside the tent. It didn't sound that close, but maybe within like 50 feet. It sounded like a person perfectly humming a tune. After listening for a couple of minutes, it was definitely somebody humming a tune. When I say perfectly, I mean just that. It sounded like a professional singer or something, because it was perfectly in tune, no voice breaks or falters at all. I can't remember whether it sounded like a man or a woman. At this point, I'm just crapping myself because it's incredibly creepy, like something out of a horror film. I hadn't left my tent at this point, and the humming hadn't gotten any louder. It just stayed a distant background noise. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't just stay there forever, so I mustered the courage to open my tent as slowly and quietly as I could, to see if I could see anything, or tell where the noise was coming from. Within 5 seconds of me poking my head out of the tent, the humming stopped. It didn't fade away or anything, it just stopped dead, as if somebody had pressed pause on a recording. I'm still very on edge at this point, but at the time I assumed that's just what it was. Somebody playing a prank on a solo camper with an audio recording. I literally couldn't think of any other explanation. Based on that assumption, I shouted something like, "You're not funny, F off." That made me feel a little bit better because I felt like I'd addressed the issue. I don't know, but for whatever reason, it helped my nerves a bit at the time. I let that hang in the air for like 10 more seconds, whilst my head is still poking out of the tent, and it stays quiet. I'm kind of satisfied by this point, so I begin moving back in. As I'm reaching for the tent zipper, though, the humming starts again. Same tune, but much louder, much closer, and from the completely opposite direction. My heart completely sinks, because there's no way somebody could have moved from the first source of the noise to the second without me seeing or hearing something. It is literally physically impossible. It was perfectly quiet in the woods, not even any breeze against the leaves, and yeah, it was dark, but I could still see short distances thanks to the moonlight. In the back of my mind, though, my subconscious is clearly working overtime trying to rationalize this, and I guess I must have assumed that there were multiple pranksters out there, with multiple audio recordings. I can't exactly remember what my thought process was at this point because it's truthfully all a blur. But for one reason or another, I stormed angrily out of the tent toward the now quite loud sound. It sounded as if the person was humming within like 10 feet of the tent. I got up out of the tent, turned toward the noise, ready to scream at the perpetrator or even attack if necessary. And that's when I see this humanoid figure silhouetted against the tree line, maybe 15 feet away from me. My best description of it is this. It was a large, thin figure that was shaped like a human, but way too tall and proportioned all wrong. It was huge. I would guess over 7 feet. Its limbs were unnaturally long, like it had been stretched out in all directions. Its head appeared very small and rounded. I think the figure was gray in color, but I can't be 100% sure because of the poor visibility. I couldn't make out much of its face at all. It just seemed to be shrouded in shadow. I definitely didn't notice any features like eyes, a mouth, or a nose. It was standing quite still, facing directly toward me. I say quite still because there was some movement, in the same way that a person or animal would sway back and forth or make some minor body movements if they were standing up. This was a real, living thing. I know that for a fact. It was not an illusion, it was not a prop, and it was not a prank. This thing was standing right in front of me and was aware of my presence. I'm literally paralyzed by fear at this point. I've never felt anything like it before or since. Just a primal terror, which left me cold, shaking, just standing there quite literally unable to move. I distinctly remember thinking that I needed to get away, but I could not physically move my body. It was the most terrified I have ever been. As I first laid eyes on this creature, the humming stopped, and then immediately it started humming again. But not a song. It started softly singing my name in what sounded like my voice. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know, but I swear that's how I remember it. Even though it was singing in my voice, though, it still didn't sound right. The syllables were just off, as though a non-human had heard speech once and was trying to mimic it for the first time, poorly. I haven't described it well, but I don't think I know the words to do so. This can't have gone on for more than about 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. Me standing there, this creature standing pretty much motionless and singing my name in my voice. At some point, though, every cell in my body just switched, and I managed to turn and run as fast as I ever have in the opposite direction. For maybe 2 minutes, I was literally sprinting through the woods in just my socks and pajamas, with absolutely no other thought in my mind other than putting distance between myself and that thing. I had no idea which direction I was going or how I would make it back to my tent. When I eventually stopped, I just leaned against this tree, panting for ages. The forest was still completely silent. I must have stayed by that tree for about 2 hours, waiting for my heart rate to settle, trying to calm down and decide what to do. I didn't want to go back to my tent. I was quite happy to leave all my stuff there, but I needed my phone and my car keys to get home. I was several miles away from anywhere. I eventually made my way back, slowly. It wasn't too hard to navigate back to my tent in those woods, because the tree distribution wasn't very dense, and I also hadn't gone quite as far as I had first feared. Once back at my tent, I grabbed just my phone and keys and went back to my car as fast as I was comfortable. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the back seat on my phone, shaking. I didn't even try to get any sleep. Once the sun was up, I managed to go back and pack up my stuff, and I left as quickly as I could. After that, I took an over 2-year break from solo camping, something I used to do every 3 or 4 months. So that's my experience. Make of it what you will. This has stayed with me ever since, and I know it always will. I don't know what was in the woods with me that night, but it has scarred me and transformed the way I think about supernatural experiences. If anyone has encountered anything similar to what I described, I'd be interested to hear. The Endless Path. This happened 2 years ago, and none of us who were there have ever been able to explain it. There were 4 of us: me, my friend James, his girlfriend Carly, and my cousin Owen. We're all in our late 20s, and we used to backpack and camp together a few times a year. James had picked a loop trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, one that wasn't too crowded but had really good reviews. Supposedly, it was about 9 miles total, with elevation changes and a nice overlook. We packed for a 2-day trip. Figured we would hike in, camp overnight, and then hike out the next morning. The trailhead was near Cades Cove, if you're familiar. We started at about 10 a.m. The weather was absolutely perfect. Overcast and cool, but not raining. The first few miles were pretty unremarkable. Trees, streams, the usual fallen logs. We took a few photos, stopped for snacks, but we were making good time. Around mile 4, we started noticing something weird. It wasn't dramatic at first, just little stuff, like a bend in the trail that looked exactly like the one we had already passed. A downed tree with a notch that James swore he'd seen an hour ago. I brushed it off as déjà vu. Forests repeat themselves. That's just how the woods work. But the weirdness escalated. We hit a fork, not a marked one, just a natural split where the path curved around a boulder. Owen wanted to go left. James said right looked familiar, and Carly said it didn't matter because both would reconnect. We went right. 10 minutes later, we came out at the same fork. Exact same boulder. Same fallen tree next to it, and it was broken in half, like it had been split by lightning. We thought maybe we had doubled back by accident. It's easy enough to do in a dense forest. So we marked the rock with a Sharpie dot and tried again. Left this time. Same thing. 15 minutes later, we were back at the same fork, and there was our dot on the rock. Now we were properly freaked out. We checked GPS. No signal. The map didn't help, because we weren't really sure where exactly on it we were. There were no trail blazes, no signage, just trees. And the weird thing was that everything between the forks was identical, like the path curvature and the tree shape, even the forest litter on the ground. James stopped walking at one point and just stared at the dirt. "That leaf pile," he said. "What about it?" I asked. "I kicked it. I remember kicking it." He pulled out his phone. The last photo he had taken had a tree with a strange curved trunk, kind of like a shepherd's crook. We all agreed we had only passed it once. He showed us the picture and then pointed up the trail. Same tree, right there. We were looping. That much was now obvious, but we didn't understand how. This wasn't some hedge maze. We weren't taking random turns. It was a loop that we couldn't get out of. We sat down and tried to retrace our steps mentally. But the more we talked about it, the more it was like trying to remember the beginning of a dream. It felt like parts of the trail had changed when we weren't looking. At one point, Carly said, "Didn't that log used to be on the other side of the path?" We all looked, and she was right. Somehow it had flipped. So we tried something new. We picked a direction back the way that we had come from, and each of us left a trail marker. Owen tied his bandana to a branch. I stacked 3 flat rocks in a kind of cairn. James left an empty granola bar wrapper wedged into the bark of a tree. Don't freak out, we picked it up later. We walked for about 30 minutes. No forks, no changes. Until we saw the bandana again. Still tied, still fluttering. Like we'd gone in a circle, but none of us had turned. Carly started crying. She was in a total spiral, and I don't blame her. It felt like the forest was playing a trick on us, but not in a funny way. In a cold, almost mean way. Like we weren't supposed to be there anymore, and it was trying to erase us by repetition. James suggested that we sit still. Don't move. Just wait and see if anything changed. Maybe whatever this thing was would release us at some point. So we sat. For 2 hours we sat. We didn't talk much. We just listened. And that part was maybe the worst. The woods were silent. No bird song, no bugs chittering away somewhere, no wind. The kind of quiet that almost makes your ears ring. When we finally stood up again, we took a completely different approach. Owen pulled out his compass and said, "Screw the trail. We go west, straight line. If we hit something, we turn back. But no curves, no loops." It took us hours, but it worked. We broke out onto a service road that wasn't marked on our map. It was old, cracked, almost overgrown, but it was real, and it wasn't looping. We followed it for nearly 2 miles until it connected to the park's main access road. Our car was parked 10 miles from there, but we didn't care. We flagged down a ranger truck, and they gave us a lift. We didn't tell them the whole story, obviously. We just said that we'd gotten turned around and lost track of the trail. But the strangest part is that when we checked the GPS data later, the tracker showed no loops, just a straight, normal path. No doubling back, no circles, like the forest was gaslighting us. Or like something really was overriding our sense of time and space. I found a staircase in the woods near Mount Hood that led nowhere. By Nicole P. I do a lot of solo hiking in the Mount Hood National Forest. I've been doing it for years. I know the popular trails, and I know plenty of the unmaintained ones. I'm comfortable being out there alone. I carry all the right gear. I know how to navigate. And I'm careful about letting people know where I'm going. Last September, I was hiking an old logging road that's technically closed, but still passable on foot. It's about 8 miles east of Government Camp, winds through second-growth forest with occasional views of the mountain. I'd been on that road maybe 4 times before. It's quiet. You rarely see another person. I was about 3 miles in when I decided to go off trail to check out a creek that I could hear running somewhere to the north. The forest there is typical Pacific Northwest. Dense Douglas fir and hemlock, thick sword ferns, moss covering everything. The ground was soft from recent rain, easy walking. I found the creek after maybe 10 minutes of bushwhacking. Nothing special, just a small stream running over rocks. I followed it upstream for a bit, looking for a good spot to filter some water. And that's when I saw the staircase. It was just standing there in the middle of the forest. Wooden stairs, maybe 12 steps total, leading up to nothing. There was no platform at the top, no structure around it, and no foundation underneath. It was just a freestanding staircase surrounded by trees and ferns. The construction looked old, but not ancient. The wood was weathered gray, but still solid. There was a railing on one side, simple posts and a handrail. The whole thing was maybe 8 feet tall. At the top, the stairs just stopped, open air. I walked around it, trying to figure out what it could have been part of. There was no evidence of a building, no remnants of walls or floor joists, no cleared area that might have been a foundation. The trees around it were mature, probably 50 or 60 years old. If there had been a structure here, it would have been a very long time ago. I took some photos. I climbed the stairs to see if there was anything visible from the top, but it was just more forest. The view wasn't any better than from the ground, really. There was no reason for the stairs to be there at all. I'd heard about staircases in the woods. There are stories online, mostly from park rangers and hikers. Unexplained stairs showing up in remote areas with no logical explanation. People always say to stay away from them. I'd always assumed those stories were creepypastas, just internet fiction. Standing there looking at actual stairs in the middle of nowhere made me reconsider. They existed. Someone had built them. The question was, why? I noticed something else while I was standing at the base. The temperature was different near the stairs. Colder. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. The air felt heavier, too. It was that thick feeling you get before a thunderstorm. I heard something above me, a creaking sound like the stairs were settling under weight. I looked up, and there was nothing there, but the creaking continued. Then I heard slow footsteps descending. I could hear each step, the wood flexing and groaning, but I couldn't see anything. I backed away. The footsteps reached the bottom and stopped. The forest went completely quiet. There were no birds, not even wind, no sound from the creek even though it was only 20 feet away. I left. I walked fast back toward the logging road. The normal sounds came back after I'd put maybe 100 yards between myself and those stairs. I made it back to the logging road and hiked out. When I got to my car, I checked the photos I'd taken. Most of them were fine, clear images of the staircase from different angles. But there was one photo that did not make sense. I had taken a picture from the top of the stairs looking down. In the photo, there was a shadow on the ground at the base, a human-shaped shadow, long and distinct, like someone was standing in direct sunlight, even though the forest canopy blocked most of the light. There was nobody in the frame, just the shadow. I went back 2 weeks later with a friend. We hiked in together, followed the same route to the creek. I couldn't find the stairs. We searched for over an hour. I had GPS coordinates from my phone, so we were in the right area. The creek was there. Terrain matched my memory. But the staircase was gone. My friend thought I had gotten confused about the location. I showed her the photos, and she got quiet. She asked me not to take her back there again. I haven't been on that logging road since. I still hike Mount Hood, but I stick to the maintained trails now. I deleted most of the photos, but I kept the one with the shadow. I sometimes look at it when I'm trying to convince myself that I imagined the whole thing, but the shadow is still there. Proof that something was standing at the base of those stairs, even if I couldn't see it. My daughter won't stop talking about the ranger. by Michelle R. I'm writing this because I need someone to tell me that I'm overreacting. Or maybe I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy. I don't even know anymore. My husband and I took our daughter Emma to Acadia National Park in Maine last month. She's 6. It was her first real camping trip, and we wanted to make it special. We stayed at the Blackwoods campground and spent 4 days hiking the carriage roads and easier trails around the park. Emma loved it. She collected rocks and leaves, asked a million questions about every plant and animal, made friends with kids at neighboring campsites. It was exactly what we'd hoped for. On our 3rd day, we hiked the Jordan Pond Path. It's a pretty easy 3-mile loop around the pond, mostly flat, perfect for kids. There were beautiful views of the Bubbles Mountains reflecting in the water. We went early in the morning to avoid crowds. About halfway around the loop, Emma stopped walking and pointed into the trees. She said, "Mommy, who's that man?" I looked where she was pointing, but I didn't see anyone. So I said, "What man?" She said, "The ranger, the one standing by the big tree watching us." My husband Marcus looked too. We were both scanning the woods, but there was nobody there, at least nobody we could see. The trail was empty in both directions, and the forest was quiet. I told Emma that there wasn't anyone there. Maybe she'd seen a shadow or a stump that looked like a person. She got upset and said, "No, there's definitely a ranger, that he was wearing the uniform with the hat and that he was just standing there and looking at us." Kids see things. They have active imaginations, right? I wasn't that worried. I told her maybe the ranger had walked away and we should keep hiking. She insisted he was still there, still watching. She started to cry and said she wanted to go back. We'd come this far, so we convinced her to keep going. We promised her hot chocolate when we got back to camp. She held Marcus's hand the whole rest of the loop and kept looking back over her shoulder. That night at the campsite, she drew pictures. She's really into drawing lately. Usually she draws our family or our cat or princesses or our cat as a princess. It just depends. That night, she drew a man in a ranger uniform. She was surprisingly detailed about it. The hat was accurate enough. The uniform looked right. She even drew the little shield patch on his sleeve. But his face was wrong. She had colored it completely black with her crayon. Like no features or anything, just a big, dark oval where his face should have been. Now, I get it, she's 6 years old, but it's not what you're thinking. Literally, she's pretty good at drawing. Usually you can tell that it's a face, there's eyes, nose, a mouth, but this was not that. I asked her why she drew his face like that, and she said that's what he looked like. His face was a big dark circle, and she couldn't see it very well. Marcus and I exchanged looks, but we tried not to make a big deal out of it. Kids are weird sometimes. We told her it was a very nice drawing and got her ready for bed. The next day was our last full day in the park. We decided to hike up Cadillac Mountain. You can drive to the summit, but we wanted to hike. We took the South Ridge Trail, which is moderate but manageable for a 6-year-old if you take breaks. Emma was in a good mood. She was excited about hiking to the top of a mountain, and we were making good progress. About an hour into the hike, she stopped again. Same thing as before. She pointed off the trail and said the ranger was there. Now, I'm not proud of this, but I was starting to get annoyed, so I told her to stop making things up. She got very serious, looked me dead in the eye, and said she was not making it up, that the ranger was following us, that he'd been behind us on the trail and now he was standing in the trees. Marcus crouched down to her level and asked her very gently what the ranger looked like. She described the same uniform, the same hat. She said his face was dark and blurry, and that he never said anything. He just watched us. I asked her if she was maybe seeing hikers behind us, and her imagination was turning them into this ranger character. She shook her head and said no, it was the same one from yesterday. We finished the hike. Emma did not mention the ranger again that day, but she was quieter than usual. She stayed close to us, and she didn't run ahead on the trail like she normally does. That was 3 weeks ago, and we've been home in Portland ever since. Emma still talks about the ranger. At first, it was just occasional comments. She'd mention him at dinner and say things like, "I wonder if the ranger is still at the park," or, "Do you think the ranger helps people who get lost?" Now, it's multiple times a day. She draws him constantly, always the same image. The uniform, the hat, the black void of a face. Yesterday, she told me the ranger is sad because nobody can see him except her. I asked her what that meant. She said he told her that. I asked her how she could have heard that because she told us that he didn't talk. She said, "Well, he told me that people just walk right past him and don't notice he's there, but I can see him, so he wanted to make sure that I knew that he was real. He doesn't talk to me like out loud. I heard him in my head." I asked her when he told her this. She said at the park, when he was following us on the trails. She reiterated that he did not talk out loud, but that she could hear him in her head. Marcus thinks we should take her to a child psychologist. He's worried that this is some kind of anxiety thing or trauma response. But Emma doesn't seem anxious or traumatized. She talks about the ranger the way kids talk about other imaginary friends, very matter-of-fact and casual. I decided to do some research. I looked up Acadia National Park rangers. I found the website with current staff photos and showed them to Emma. I said, "I know his face was blurry, but do any of these people look like the man you saw?" She said no, that none of them were right. Then, on a hunch, I started looking into the park's history. Accidents, deaths, missing people. I found something that made my stomach drop. In 1974, a park ranger named Thomas Whitaker disappeared while on patrol near Jordan Pond. He'd radioed that he was checking on some hikers and never made contact again. They searched for weeks, found his truck at the trailhead, but no sign of him. The search was eventually called off. He was declared dead, but they never found a body. I found one newspaper article from the time with a photo. It was grainy and black and white, but clear enough. Thomas Whitaker in his ranger uniform, wearing the hat. I showed Emma the photo on my laptop. I didn't tell her anything about who it was. She looked at it for a long time. Then she pointed at the screen and said, "Yeah, that's him. That's the ranger who was following us." I asked how she could be sure if his face was blurry, and she said, "Yes, I am sure." She said that his face looks different in the picture, that in real life she couldn't see his face very well. It was like looking at something through the water, she said. I closed the laptop and told her we'd talk about it later. She went back to playing with her toys like nothing had happened. Marcus doesn't believe me when I tell him about Thomas Whitaker. He thinks Emma recognized something similar in the uniform and her brain connected it to her imaginary ranger. Confirmation bias or whatever. But I can't shake it. Emma had never seen a photo of a park ranger before our trip. Not historical photos from the 1970s. And she knew details that she shouldn't know. The uniform was accurate for that era. The patch placement, even the style of hat, had changed slightly over the decades, and she drew the older version. Last night, she told me the ranger wanted her to know that he's not lost anymore, that he knows where he is now. He's been at the park the whole time, and he's okay with that. I didn't really know this ranger had followed us home, or whatever. and I don't know what to do with this information. I don't know if I should take Emma to a therapist or a priest or just wait for her to forget about it. But she's not forgetting. If anything, she talks about him more. This morning, she asked if we could go back to Acadia soon. She said the ranger misses her. I told her maybe next summer, and she seems satisfied with that answer. But I am not taking her back there. I don't care how much she asks.